Hey everyone, welcome to Coffee with Changemakers. I'm Robin.
And I'm Yoshi. On the Coffee with Changemakers podcast, we explore the stories of changemakers taking on some of today's biggest social and environmental challenges.
Every episode, we host an intimate conversation on social impact and leadership, where we listen, learn, and connect over a cup of coffee with inspiring guests from all over the world.
So before we jump into today's episode, we have a quick ask. If you enjoy our conversations, it would mean the world to us if you subscribe, rate, and perhaps even tell a friend about the show. Your support helps us bring even more inspiring guests onto future episodes.
So, here's today's coffee chat. Enjoy. Today we'll be speaking with Kana Watando, co-founder of INOW Kamikatsu, an educational tourism organization based in Kamikatsu, the first zero-waste village in Japan. Now, in this small rural town, residents have found a way to divert some 80% of waste away from landfill and transform waste into wonder, setting an example for sustainable living that's been picked up by media around the world. Kana's organization, INOW Kamikatsu, is deeply embedded in the local community, providing education programs for young people, homestay experiences, immersive group programs, such as its Zero Waste Summer Program, and more. Through transformative travel experiences, INOW helps visitors learn about Kamikatsu's sustainable way of life and how they can integrate more zero-waste principles into their own lives, while also giving back to local residents and connecting in intimate ways. The organization's been widely recognized for its contributions and innovative approach to sustainable tourism, including by winning the Japan Travel Awards 2024 and also the prestigious Circular Awards in 2021. So we're super excited to have Kana on board for the podcast. How are you doing, Kana?
Great, yes. Enjoying life in Kamikatsu.
The greenery that's shining through your window is making me highly jealous. Yeah. My image of Kamikatsu is this idyllic kind of paradise in the island of Shikoku in Japan. And just seeing you online, living your life, just is really an enjoyable experience for me. So we're really glad to have you here and hear about your journey to Kamikatsu and what you're up to there as well.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I mean, it is quite idyllic. I mean, a lot of green, a lot of nature, a lot of rivers, and a lot of birds chirping in the morning, waking me up. And so, yeah, it's not without its challenges and inconveniences, but I am very, very grateful to be here.
Amazing. Well, I'm joining from a living room surrounded by cardboard boxes. I've just moved house, so we live in very different settings right now. But maybe we can dive straight into the first topic, which is really your background and your story to Kamikatsu. So for those who don't know you, can you tell us a bit about your early years? Where did you grow up and what were you like as a child?
Wow, what was I like as a child? I wasn't expecting that one. But I grew up in Canada. I was born and raised in Toronto. My family moved from Toronto to Vancouver, so the east coast to the west coast of Canada. But I think being raised in Canada gave me a very multi-diverse and culturally rich upbringing. A lot of friends spoke 2-3 languages. Being able to go over to their houses was, in essence, traveling. And so I think that was kind of the bedrock of how I grew up. As a child, I was incredibly shy. I remember we had to do a talent show, and I couldn't end up performing because I was just crying backstage. And so incredibly shy, but have really grown out of that shell. And thanks to friends, thanks to different experiences, that have made me really push my own comfort zone. As a child, I was also quite crafty, so I was somebody who could be very encapsulated in my own world by doing creative things. I wasn't very outdoorsy or very athletic, but those also came later, and I'm very grateful for that. Those kind of experiences in my early teens also shaped who I am now.
Amazing. And I've heard you also spent some time in Europe during your studies. Is that right? Can you tell us a bit more about that chapter of your life?
Yeah, I did my master's in sustainability and tourism in Europe. And it was a really cool mobility scheme where I studied for 6 months in Denmark and then 6 months in Slovenia and then 6 months in Spain. In between, I also did a research position in Greenland. So I was in Greenland for a couple months as well. But this program was really diverse. We also had 30 students and we represented 24 countries in that cohort. And so yeah, that was also a really important experience to what I'm doing now. I think the diversity and the inclusivity, those themes really resonate from early on and until now.
And what was your journey to Japan? I know you have Japanese heritage, but how did you come to Kamikatsu?
Yeah, I think we're all half, right? There's some Japanese in all of us. My mother's Japanese actually, and I just have this memory of like NHK running in the background all day. She would just have it on. It was a radio or it was TV. And I was forced to go to Japanese class when I was in Canada. Um, and I didn't like it. I also cried there too, just so much crying as a kid. But I learned to speak and read and write Japanese, and but I had never actually lived in Japan. I had traveled to see my grandparents, but once my grandparents passed away, there was not really a purpose to go. But I always thought I would like to try living in Japan, and maybe that also resonates with you both. But with that, I decided that I had some conditions, and those were I don't want to live in the city. And so I was searching for interesting places in the countryside, and I really found so many incredible examples of small communities doing really wonderful things. But of course, my interest in sustainability, waste as well, drew me to Kamikatsu, and I thought I would travel here. And it's been almost 5 years, so yeah, that's the journey to Kamikatsu.
What was it about living in the rural parts of Japan that really drew you? Was it a kind of hatred for the city, or was it what was it that really brought you to the countryside?
I mean, I don't hate cities. I think they're incredible places for exchange and connection. I also grew up in a city in Toronto. Um, so not to be too hard on cities, but I think actually it was more than like the rural lifestyles. It was trying to connect with a Japan that felt maybe at that time the word probably traditional was something that resonated with me. I think, having very kind of touch points of culture through my mom, through the food, through the language, but not much else. We didn't celebrate any holidays or festivals or, there was only a limited amount of things that she could cook with that were Japanese. And so I really wanted to explore this, maybe what you can say, deeper Japan. And I felt that maybe that was still in the countryside.
That's fascinating. I just want to share. I also went to a Japanese language school when I was younger in the UK, and I also cried when I went there. So maybe there's a common theme happening there with tears when we were younger. But what was it in Kamikatsu that drew you there? You could have gone to, I guess, many places across Japan, but what was it about Kamikatsu?
Yeah, I think I just got lucky. It was also in part coincidence. I did a homestay with somebody who is actually very focal in the zero waste movement here in Kamikatsu, and being able to live alongside her family was just a kind of open gateway into the community of Kamikatsu. And I have no other experiences in Japan to compare to except life here in Kamikatsu. But I would say the community is incredibly open-minded, and there is a lot of support for people who are trying to do their own thing. And so I think those things help me realize that, oh, I could also do something here.
And just for those who've never been to Kamikatsu, what can you paint a picture of the town? I know it's a very small town, but what is it like to be there?
Yeah, I think when people hear like a small rural town in remote Japan, they think of a very small, like kind of condensed village. But actually, Kamikatsu is incredibly large. To get from one end of the town to the other by driving is about 40 minutes. And there are so many small little hamlets in the mountains. And so we are a population of 1,400 people. And that's the official smallest village in Japan. Or sorry, in Shikoku. In Shikoku. And yeah, so people live very geographically separate from each other. This was a town built on forestry, like many other rural places in Japan. And so forestry was very big post World War II. And now it's a declining industry. And agriculture is also very big, but very difficult because of the mountainous landscape. And so there's a lot of terraced rice fields, and that's a big draw from a tourism point of view, the landscape.
And how did your journey with INOW begin?
Yeah, I mean, I knew about Kamikatsu and what they're doing in the recycling and zero waste effort, and I wanted to learn about it, and that's the reason I came to Kamikatsu, but I couldn't find anyone who A, spoke English, and B, had information beyond kind of like a short presentation or a small kind of a walking tour that you could do at the Zero Waste Center. And so as I lived in Kamikatsu, I realized that also waste is so connected to everyone and also so connected to our lifestyles. I think waste is really the result of kind of all the choices we make in our daily life. And then the result is waste. And so actually lifestyle and consumption and those kind of things were very important or became very important. And I wanted to share about that. And so then I decided, okay, well, through an educational program, I could build this kind of experiential learning.
And to give an idea to listeners of the zero waste part of Kamikatsu, it's become this very famous case study, even internationally, where I believe there's 45 categories of rubbish and so on. But can you tell us a bit more about that side of the town?
Yeah, so of course, zero waste doesn't mean no garbage. It doesn't mean we produce no garbage. I think everywhere in the world we're connected to systems where plastic is an issue, consumption is an issue, and so Kamikatsu isn't free of those kind of systemic issues around waste. But what we do is intensive recycling, and most of Japan incinerates or landfills their waste, but in Kamikatsu, waste is actually seen as a resource, and so by seeing waste as a resource, we recycle and try to reuse what is possible to be reused. And that saves costs. So there's a huge economic incentive and drive to doing this zero waste system, but also that those things that don't need to end up in incineration or landfill get diverted and get put back.
Amazing. I love that, seeing waste as a resource. And there's so many interesting philosophies. Also, looking back to Japanese history about seeing waste as treasure. Like, you can turn trash into treasure in many ways. So I love how Kamikatsu is really at the forefront of that movement here in Japan. And before I hand over to Yoshi to go more into the story of INOW and what you're up to now, I'd love to hear about your image of yourself as a younger person. Did you always have this image of yourself being a change maker?
Yeah, I think that I wouldn't say that I've always wanted to be a change maker. Actually, I don't even know if I knew the word change maker younger, but I do feel like I was always curious about, building and co-creating kind of a better world. And in that perspective, the change part, and I think the maker part is like the action part. And so I think that came in later in life, but I do feel like I've always been someone very hopeful and optimistic, and I think could be categorized as naive by many people, perhaps. But I do feel like I was very aspirational about wanting something better and believing in the future that could be better. And I think, yeah, the latter part of change maker, taking action. I think as someone who's always been, as I mentioned before, quite shy and quite timid, that felt quite scary to do, but it's not so daunting because I think that it can be really small, and it could be a community like Kamikatsu that did it on a really small scale, where at the beginning nobody knew what we were doing, but it mattered to this community, and so that's what mattered. And then through that kind of authentic desire to do something better, attracted a lot of attention. So I do think that change maker is not something I've always wanted to do, but I can see how it lives out in what I'm doing now.
Wow, that's a great segue into the next section where we kind of dive a little bit more into projects and impact, Kana. But so I understand that you're one of the co-founders of INOW, and in Japanese, INOW means prayer, right? INOW. Does that have anything to do with the name, or like where does the name come from?
Wow, I've never heard that before. No,
Oh, okay.
this is a 3 o'clock bell. Is it in the
Oh,
way?
nice. Oh, nice. No, that's totally
Right.
fine. You can leave that.
We have to keep this in. This is great.
We have a bell at 7, 10, 12, 3, and 5, which is kind of like the day of a farmer. So this is the time where I would take tea and have a snack.
Perfect.
Um,
Tea time. Coffee time.
Tea time.
It's almost over. Do, 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 do.
You can give us some audio version of what's going on.
But to get back to your question, yeah, actually, is the local dialect for return home. So it means kaido in Awaben. Yeah, so people say ino. And so the idea with that was that, when people come to Kamikatsu, I think they're seeking connection, and we want people to feel at home in Kamikatsu. So we want Kamikatsu to be a place they can always return to physically, but also, connected online, so that this becomes a community. So that was the idea.
Oh, that's beautiful.
But maybe
I'm really
a
glad
prayer
I
as
asked.
well.
So
Also, sometimes in English, people read it like I know, but I like
I
that
know.
too. Like, I know. Yeah.
I know. Nice, nice, nice. So yeah, could you tell me a little bit more about just the origin story, like how you met your co-founders, like how you guys came up with the idea, like that? Yeah, super excited to hear that.
Yeah, at the beginning, it was really that more like an exchange, like not like wolfing or work away, but
Mm.
one of the realities in rural Japan is that it's just a declining population.
Yep.
And this is a reality across Japan, not just in the rural areas. But that means that certain practices like farming or making tea or making rice, it just becomes increasingly difficult to sustain. So the idea
Mm.
was, well, why don't we invite people to stay with us, and they could help with these things. And in exchange, we can share with them, our friends, our community,
Mm.
allow them to have a deeper, more immersive experience. And then actually COVID happened. And so we had about 1 year's worth of these people who wanted to come on these exchanges to come here and live in Kamikatsu. It was like
Wow.
January, this person, February, this person, March, this
Wow.
person, and it all got canceled.
Oh.
And so it gave us, in a way, an opportunity to reflect on how we could do this sustainably.
Mm.
And we invested a lot of our personal time in the community, just helping out ourselves. We started making our own tea, farming our own rice, and then decided that actually there was probably a desire for people to have a more educational experience as well. And so we decided to kind of create INOW. So that was myself, Terumi. Terumi is a local who was born and raised in Kamikatsu, and her mother was actually the pioneer of the zero waste movement. And there was another Canadian here at the time, and her name is Linda. And now Linda has left, but Sil is my partner, and he came to Japan 2 years ago, and he is helping run the program as well. So it's the three of us right now.
Oh, nice, nice, nice. Iran, ine. I'm really glad that, really happy to hear that. So it was a really organic sort of way in which the idea involved, and you involved. I mean, one of the locals was like one of the key leaders of all of this. So that's really, really incredible to hear.
I guess, yeah, like how in terms of like I know you guys bring in people from I guess across around Japan and also people from around the world, but I was wondering, what do the numbers kind of look like for you right now? Like, is it more foreigners? Is it more surprisingly more locals that want this experience? Like, and if you
Mhm.
could share a little bit more about, yeah, the approximate number of people you're getting involved on like a monthly or annual basis, that'd be cool.
Yeah, our first year was only a half a year, but our first half year we had 20 people.
Okay.
And this is our fourth year and this half year. So from January to July of this year, we've had 96 people.
Wow.
And so we've seen huge growth. And it's really exciting because a lot of that growth also comes from doing tours for or programs for high school students, for
Mm,
university students.
mm,
Um, and so we do these programs that last anywhere from 2 days to a week. We've
mm,
also started welcoming groups of other entrepreneurs, and that's
mm.
really exciting because it feels like it's not just them learning,
Yep.
which is what happens in for high school groups, but it's really an exchange. And so we create these spaces for exchange so that local people can learn from the entrepreneurs who come, and the
Mm,
entrepreneurs can learn from the local entrepreneurs.
mm.
So yeah, we've seen immense growth. Of course, we're limited in our capacity because we're a very, very small team, and the people we work with, this isn't their main job. But yeah, there's been lots of growth, and I would say as the demographics, while the age is anywhere from from teens until we've had someone in their late 60s, and but most people are coming from abroad. I
Okay.
would say probably 90%. Yeah,
Okay, 90%
mhm.
international. That's really nice. That's really
International,
nice.
yeah.
Um, so yeah, so I guess I guess could you call these tours your main product? Or how do you create impact?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, for work, yes, these programs, our tours are the main thing we spend our energy and time on.
Okay.
Other things we do is make tea. So I think I
Okay.
mentioned tea making, but we
Yes.
make a traditional tea called awabancha. It's a fermented tea.
네.
And
네.
actually, now is the season. So if I wasn't on this podcast, I'd probably be picking tea. But it's made in the heat of summer, but it's a very, very local tea and another kind of tradition that's really vulnerable to being lost because of the aging population and the
Yep. Yep.
toughness of this work. But
Wow.
we do that and we share tea with the world. And I think that's really important because, it's something that's so local, and sometimes local people can't see the value in what they do. And by
Mm,
sharing with other people and sharing with international guests this tradition, this craft, people feel pride in what they do as well. And so I think
yep.
it all kind of comes back around.
Oh, that's beautiful. I think you just kind of convinced me to sign up on one of these tours. Um, like, yeah, I'm also kind of like you. I'm a city boy. Grew up in cities my whole life. And I returned to Japan at the age of 20 or 21. So I don't know my
Hmm.
own country very well.
Mm.
And I think if you don't know rural Japan, you really don't understand Japan. So
Mm.
yeah, you have one new customer today. But anyways, could you maybe take us through an average day or an average week of what a person would go through if they had signed up for one of your experiences?
Hmm. I think, well, first of all, thank you for sharing that. Please come to Kamikatsu. You're welcome anytime.
Yes.
And if you want to be a tea farmer, you're also
Right.
most
Yeah, I
welcome.
love that. I was a coffee farmer, so I can do tea.
Um, yeah, for an average week, it really depends on the background of the guests.
Mm,
And so, if you're an artist, we would show you craftspeople in the village.
mm,
Some people work with wara, rice straw. Some people work with yeah, different natural materials and making like brooms or making sandals or making carpets. And so that would be some experiences if you were maybe interested in craft. If you were interested in food, we have organic farmers, and so we will go to organic farms and we will help out on the farm. Yeah, it really depends with the entrepreneurs. We'll meet the CEO of these businesses that are in town, for example, like a brewery. And with the brewery, they make fertilizer with the beer waste. And so, so many interesting initiatives around waste and how to rethink waste.
Wow.
And I think at the heart of what we do, we always try to share about the zero waste system and the history, what are some
Yeah.
of the factors that led up to making this possible for the community.
Mm,
Um,
mm, mm,
yeah,
mm.
and things are very seasonal, so it's hard to say like this is what you will experience.
Right, 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 right. That's incredible. Wow. I'm sure that, you and your team has encountered numerous challenges along the way. Could you maybe share a story or two of one specific challenge that you and your team was able to first identify and overcome together?
Oh, that's a good question. I think there are just cultural differences.
Yep, yep.
I mean, I think that I can be quite straightforward or direct, and sometimes
Mm.
that doesn't always resolve issues right away. Trying to
Mm-hmm,
think of a
mm-hmm.
specific issue. hmm Yeah, I think it's navigating those cultural differences in
Yep,
general.
yep.
I think that people, as I said before, in Kamikatsu are very open-minded and very accepting and
Mm.
welcoming. But sometimes it's hard to convince them that what we're doing adds value to them as well.
Mm. I
I think
see.
once they meet the guests and once they feel the kind of richness of exchange and collaboration,
Right,
they're really convinced. But a lot of times
right.
people say like, "Oh, why do you want to come to my farm?" Or "Why do you want to help me with this?" Or "Why do you want to come to my home?" I have nothing to share. But
Mm,
um,
mm, mm.
because we have that trust with the community, and I say, yeah, but just meet this person. I think you'll really like them. Then
Yeah,
it
yeah, yeah,
usually
yeah.
works out. Yeah, but
Yeah.
maybe it's those kind of cultural differences.
I can totally see that. I'm just imagining in my mind, like, an elderly gentleman or gentlewoman just being like, yeah,
hmm
yeah, 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 like, there's
Yeah,
there's
yeah, yeah, yeah,
nothing.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
like I can totally see that happening. So, wow. Otsukare-sama for being able to overcome such cultural challenges in Japan. On the flip side, if you can maybe share some success stories of things that you and your team was able to celebrate together, that would be cool. Rewarding moments.
Yeah. Mm. Well, I think yeah, Robin, thank you for your intro. But in the intro, I think you mentioned that we were awarded the Circular Award in
Mm,
2021, and
nice.
the other award was also very meaningful to us. But I think why I feel like the circular award was really a success or an accomplishment for us is because that I think that when people think about circularity, circular economy, our mind gravitates towards innovation, technology, material, and those things are so incredibly important. But we were awarded by a judge who saw that circularity is as much as about how we consume and our lifestyles and our ways of relating. Like we are humans who create these technologies. And so fundamentally thinking about human first and human in relation to these kind of innovations was really meaningful to us because that's what we want to do with INOW is like step back
Mm,
and think about how we as humans can think about circularity and circular economy.
yep. Wow. Thank you.
Yeah.
And having had many, many people go through your programs, your different services, and different experiences that you provide, what are some of the changes you see once people go home, when people move on from Kamikatsu? What changes do people undergo?
I mean, yeah, measuring impact is so difficult on like because this experience is so personal to different
Yeah.
people. We've had people who've come back and say, I've decided to change careers or I've decided to start something or like these small actions in my community. we have a kurukuru shop, which is just a shop where people can drop off anything for free and pick up anything for free. Um, and so we've had people say, "Oh, I've started that in my hometown," and those are very touching to hear, but it's hard to measure like personal transformation and hard to make that also a promise. But I think that in the process of coming to Kamikatsu, it's like a really an opportunity to reflect on your own ways of how you use your time, how you relate to waste, how you think about, what can I do to do things for myself, like self-sufficiency or repair and these things. And so I think it's it's hard to measure that change, but I definitely do feel like it's a moment where people are very reflective, and I think change starts with that kind of introspection.
Absolutely. As you say, it is hard to track, but I know from also personal experience, having spent time in certain rural parts of Japan, that it really does transform you in some way. You see things differently, as you say, self-sufficiency, community relations, right? I grew up in a city, and like, I didn't even know my neighbor, but as soon as I move out into the more countryside parts of the country, it's like, say hello to everyone. It's all very intimate in some way. And I think there's so many of those small things that I think leave quite a large impact once you move on from these kinds of experiences. What I really love about what you're doing, with INOW, is that I think many small towns across Japan and across many parts of the world are facing challenges, right, with depopulation. I know the population of Kamikatsu, I believe over half of the population is over 65 or something along those
Yeah,
lines.
yeah.
There's so many challenges with depopulation, with the hollowing out of towns and local municipalities. And what you're doing is not just bringing tourists to like come, hop off the bus and buy some tea and then go move on. You're bringing people in, and this is from my perspective. You're helping to really integrate them into the community, have really intimate connections and conversations. And in many cases, people, I'm sure, will go back, and people will, in some way contribute to the longer term sustainability of the town. And that's why I really, really respect and like what you're doing. But does that ring true? Does that sound on point?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think this is a challenge that many rural areas face. I think what Kamikatsu does very well, and has set itself up well, is to really identify like what is it that we do? Like what is it that we stand for? Like what are our values as a community? And I think a lot of places that are trying to deal with depopulation or rural revitalization, they're trying to copy others instead of like kind of reflecting on the community assets that are already embedded into the place. And I think that in Kamikatsu, we were able to do that, and that kind of authentic story resonates with a lot of people and brings people here.
I love that. Having been on this journey for many years and having started this new organization, you must have grown in so many ways. And if you had to reflect on your own personal growth during this time, what would you say were some key growth areas or lessons that you've learned?
That, yeah, I think that running a business is hard.
For sure.
No, it's incredibly purposeful and meaningful, and I think one of the questions that you had posed is like what wakes you up in the morning, and this does. And I'm incredibly grateful and lucky to be doing what I love. I think a lesson I learned, not necessarily because I chose to learn the lesson, but that was imposed on me, was, dealing with COVID so early on, as I had mentioned before. But that was a gift because I think that a lot of change makers, and probably this resonates with both of you, your drive is like, so incredibly powerful. And I think that's really important. But sometimes going slow is also meaningful. And I don't know if I would have built that kind of foundation and trust with the community if I had wanted to do what I wanted to do from day one. And so I think that being kind of forced to slow down, or not slow down, but take things step by step was maybe very meaningful, or it was like a good lesson. I think that was the question.
That really resonates because there's this famous saying of move quick and break things, and there's always this
Mhm.
focus on like scale, speed. Let's accelerate. And what I really like about what you just said is that in some ways going slowly is much more productive, much more meaningful, especially when establishing trust with local populations. You can't just charge in and say, "Hey, I'm going to, take over the village and blah blah blah." I really that really resonates with me that you're saying in some way going slowly, step by step, was actually the key to your success to date. But does that check out with you?
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you were going to go through this journey again from day one, would you change anything? And if so, what would you change?
Would I change anything? I don't think I would change anything. Yeah, I think hindsight can be such an important kind
Mm.
of tool and reflection, but I think I couldn't change certain circumstances. I mean, I definitely wouldn't want COVID for the world again, so I mean, maybe would change yet that, but I mean, I think the circumstances were a lot of it was out of my control, and so yeah, I don't think I would change anything. Yeah.
And now that you've been there, you're making change on the ground. If there are people out there listening who are inspired by your story, which I'm sure there are, and they want to take some kind of similar step, whether in sustainable tourism or elsewhere,
Mhm.
what advice or tips would you share with them?
Yeah, I mean, if it was particularly about sustainable tourism or, you know, tourism in general, I would definitely think that having a really deep understanding of place is very important. So I think, yeah, I said before, but like, what is the community values? What does it stand for? Like, what are the cultural assets or the community assets? Like, what are the things that make this place? And it's not even about like tradition or, heritage or history, but those layers of knowledge that have built up in a place, and then using those as um, kind of building blocks for integrating people who visit. That makes a much more like authentic experience in tourism, I think. And I think, yeah, in general, in life generally, if this is life advice in general, I think that I think being able to being able to spend your time not only doing your business, but relating to people. So like saying hello to the neighbor, like you said, Robin, or creating relationships with people, um, has been very nourishing and very enriching. And I know that if I don't do this business tomorrow, that I would still have a community that would support me to do something else and try something else. So I'm very grateful for having and maintaining those relationships in the community.
Amazing. You mentioned drive earlier and motivation, and I know you're super busy. Like, I know from our previous interactions. My image is that in nature. So I used to, for example, I live for 4 or 5 months a year in a small village or a small town in the mountains, and I find it much easier to like look after myself and do some self
Hmm.
care, like going for walks, going swimming in the river, whatever it might be.
Hmm.
Do you think that's a valid perspective? Do you find it easier to look after yourself and do self care in Kamikatsu versus, let's say, a city?
Yeah, yeah. Yoshi, you need to get out here too. But I think rest comes much easier. I think that I don't feel this kind of pressure to do things fast or do things um, because I'm missing out on things. Uh, when you're in a walk with nature, everything is interesting and you can put your attention to so many different things that have nothing to do with work or the busyness of life. And so I do think that that connection with nature is part of what people seek for when they come to Kamikatsu, even though the hook is really learning about zero waste or waste. But those are definitely parts of life that are very important for me in Kamikatsu.
And I want to pick up on one thing you said earlier, which really again resonated with me, was with rural depopulation and rural revitalization. If I'm hearing you correctly, you think it's important to really pick up on local characteristics. It's not just a cut and paste solution where you can do X and Y and Z and replicate it. That being said, I feel like there's a lot that we can learn from both INOW and related or somewhat similar programs. And there's nothing quite like INOW, I know, but there's a lot of sustainable tourism projects that are popping up across the country. What do you think can be applied from your learnings, from your insights, from your experience to other small towns in Japan? And how would that look to you?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I mean, I think people do come here to see what can I take from, like, as a lesson and take back to my communities. And sometimes a lot of people will say, like, oh, you could only do it because you're a small community. But I don't think that's true. I think there are small communities everywhere, even if you're in a city. That could be like your apartment building, it could be your neighborhood. And I think what Kamikatsu has shown is that people can change. There's something that a lot of local people say here, and I don't know if this is something that people say all around Japan, but usually of a of the population, you know, the top 20 or top 10% really, really care about an issue, and the bottom 10 to 20% really don't care about an issue. And then the whole middle section is just really indifferent. But what Kamikatsu did is create a system where people who are indifferent can still participate in this recycling effort, in this, you know, making resources out of waste. And so creating a system change in a community is really something that I think is a good model for creating kind of long-term sustainable change.
Wow. Thank you, Kana. So I guess I wanted to kind of follow up on what Robin said earlier, because, you know, this is something that I find super interesting, super fascinating, is, you know, as a former community development worker myself, I think it's sometimes very tricky to balance between, you know, I guess protecting the local, you know, population, their local heritage, right? The way in which they've always done things, versus, you know, bringing people from abroad, right? Because in a way we're guests in their communities. But I definitely think that, you know, you guys were able to strike the right balance, and that's why you've been able to continue this program as long as you have. May I ask, like, what were some of the key lessons in striking that right balance that you've learned over the years? Or what do you think you guys do uniquely that helps to, you know, ensure that, you know, local people are content or happy, while making sure that foreigners get that authentic experience that they want?
Yeah, that balance is tricky. I don't know if like every day I can say we've like nailed it, but I do feel that people generally feel very, both local people and first and foremost, we do things making sure that local people feel respected and valued, and that there's a contribution back to their time. And then the guests come second, you know? And I think something that we've always held as like a value from the beginning is co-creation. And we are not going to promise you something, neither the locals nor the guests, but that this is really like what we all put into it. And I think what does is facilitate those kind of experiences and exchange. So, yeah, I think when you value co-creation, kind of everyone wins in a way, because we're all creating something that we all care about.
Exactly. Love that. Co-creation. Nice. That's going to stick with me. Cool. Well, looking ahead, so what's next on the horizon for you, either yourself or for INOW? Like, are there any exciting upcoming projects that you want to share with us or our listeners?
Well, the summer program is really interesting. Not just the summer program, but these kind of programs in general. We usually do programs when we get requests, but this is something that we've created because we want to create all these experiences and put in together. So I hope that that attracts, just such diverse people from around the world with different backgrounds, and we can all learn from each other. So that was the intention there. Next month, INOW will be actually showcasing Awabancha at a international conference called Slow Food. And so Slow Food is an organization that promotes food and food sustainability. And Awabancha is actually recognized as cultural heritage by the Ministry of Culture in Japan. And so we get to share about Awabancha and do tea tastings. And yeah, but Awabancha doesn't travel really much beyond Kamikatsu. And so it's very exciting to be able to share it with thousands of people in Italy.
Oh, nice. Very cool.
So that's
Italy,
exciting.
one of
That's
my
next
favorite
month.
places. Okay, okay. So last but not least, we always ask our guests to provide or leave a piece of advice for aspiring change makers. So we do have a lot of young guests or young audience members listening to this podcast as well. So yeah, if you've been there, you've done that. So if there's a word of advice that you would like to share, somebody who's thinking of starting their own projects or wanting to do their own thing, what would that be?
That you're not alone. Like, I think a lot of people come to Kamikatsu feeling very alone, but actually they're surprised by a community of people who also are thinking about what they're thinking about. And so I think as a young person, there's a lot of insecurity. Like, I don't know enough. I don't have enough years. I don't have XYZ. But that's okay because other people will help you in those areas that maybe you're less confident about. So I think that, that there's a community if you seek for a community. And I think that, you don't have to rush at it because life is long. Even though I know, I don't know if I would even listen to myself having that advice as a young person because I'm like, okay, I just want to do something. And maybe that's good. I mean, that sense of urgency is so poignant to being a young person, but that also going a little bit slower and resting and taking care of yourself along the way is not a bad idea.
Yes. Beautiful, beautiful. So remember, everyone, you are not alone in Kamikatsu.
Yeah, come to Kamikatsu.
Yes. Well, thank you so much, Kara, for sharing your amazing insights with us. I want to just share a couple of my main takeaways. So I think, for me, especially what you said earlier, kind of about like when you're walking in nature, everything is interesting. I think that really struck a chord with me because I think most people, myself included, think that no, cities are more interesting. Out in nature, there's nothing. But what you just stated was the opposite. You said, everything is interesting in nature, and that was a aha moment for me. So I'll definitely double down on what I said earlier about coming and visiting you guys, because that's very much needed in my life right now. Because I just returned to Japan just 10 days ago. And everything's been like bam, 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 So and just look at you, Kana. You're so soft spoken. You're so grounded, so centered, and maybe that's always been the way you've always been. But I think Kamikatsu definitely has a role in that too. So yeah, those are my takeaways. But how about you, Robin?
I've really enjoyed this conversation, and I until 4 days ago, I used to live in the countryside of Chiba, where I was the youngest person by about 30 years, and people would give us vegetables and all these things, and I just a lot of what you shared really hit home, I think, in many ways, and I think on a maybe bigger picture level, one of the biggest crises we have right now is a crisis of loneliness and disconnection, and I think hearing your stories of how you interact with local people, how even if everything fell apart, you'd still be part of a community. That is actually what a lot of people are seeking. And you facilitating those kinds of experiences that bring people outside to the inside and start to foster those connections is really incredibly valuable, I think. And as Yoshi was saying, you're very, and as you were saying earlier, like you were shy as a younger person, but I also sense a very strong, a fierce kind of resolve with what you're doing. You're clearly so mission driven and incredibly courageous in many ways. You and your team for pioneering what you're doing in Kamikatsu. One other thing as well is, I had exactly the same realization that social change is not a sprint, right? It's a marathon. You cannot just keep sprinting 150% because eventually you'll burn out or you'll end up going in the wrong direction. So 100% on board with the go slowly, take it step by step, look after yourself, have fun, say hello to your neighbor and all of these things too. Finally, what I will do after this conversation is buy some INOW Awa Bancha from the Cafe Polestar website. We will keep the link in the show notes to INOW Kamikatsu and any other links as well. But kind of where can people find out more about what you're up to?
Yeah, well, first, thank you so much for the beautiful reflection summary at the end. That was a nice, treat. And I didn't know at the beginning of this podcast that my mission would now be for Yoshi to come to Kamikatsu and experience in nature. But now it is. And I'm happy to ship you both some Awabancha tea, but if you ever decide you need a career change, you're welcome to become the youngest farmers in Kamikatsu as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you want to stay in touch with us by our website, kamikatsu.com, and we have been sending some newsletters kind of every 4 months or so, every quarter or so, just sharing, big things, but also little things like, oh, today we planted rice. So if that's interesting to you, you can also subscribe to that.
Nice.
Amazing.
Cool.
And I know you also have an Instagram account.
Yes,
as in
we
INOW.
do. Yes,
Yeah. Okay.
INOW Kamikatsu.
We'll keep that somewhere in the show notes as well. Brilliant.
Thank you so much.
All right. Well, everyone, we just heard from Kana Watando. So please check out their website at inowkamikatsu.com. That's INOWKAMIKATSU.com. So to all of our listeners, if you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe, rate, and share. We'll be back with more stories of impact very, very soon. And remember, coffee friends, the power to create change is in your hands, so keep leading the way. We'll catch you in the next episode. Let's keep brewing change one cup of coffee at a time. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.